She stood in a $4 million penthouse holding a positive pregnancy test, wearing silk pajamas, rehearsing the exact words she would use to tell her husband the most beautiful news of their marriage. She never got to say them, because when Marcus Weston walked through that door, he was not coming home to celebrate. He was coming home to execute a plan 14 months in the
This
making.
is the
A
settlement
plan
agreement.
his own
Take your
mother
time
had been
reviewing it.
quietly building since the second
My
year of
mind
their
is already
marriage.
made up.
A plan that ended with two men in dark suits, a non-disclosure agreement, and Claire Hartley standing on a Manhattan sidewalk in February with no coat, no wallet, no name, and a 6-week-old life inside her that nobody had bothered to factor into the calculation. He called her a loose end that needed handling. He signed the papers. He moved on. He believed she was gone. He was wrong. Because what Marcus Weston never knew, what nobody in that penthouse knew, what Claire herself did not know until 48 hours after she was thrown out onto the street, was that her quiet grandfather, the man who sent birthday cards with $20 bills, had spent the last 5 years of his life building something specifically for this moment. $87 billion and a firewall that no attorney on earth could touch. Stay with this story, because what happens next is not just about money or revenge or a woman who got even. It is about what happens when someone underestimates you so completely that they hand you the exact conditions you needed to become unstoppable. Legend statement. This is a story about what gets built in the silence after someone decides you do not matter, and why the people who discard others are always eventually surprised by what those people become. If this story is already pulling at something in you, do one small thing before we go any further. Hit the like button right now, not for us, for every person who has ever been called a loose end and refused to believe it. Leave a comment below telling us the city you are listening from. We read every single one, and watching this story travel around the world matters more to us than you know. And if you have a friend who needs to hear something like this today, share it with them. Just send it. No explanation needed. They will understand why when they hear it. Subscribe if you have not already, because we are here every week with stories like this one. Stories about people who got back up every single time. Now, let us begin.
She had rehearsed this moment at least 20 times. Standing at the bathroom mirror with the positive pregnancy test sitting on the edge of the sink, Claire Hartley had run through every version of how this morning could go. The version where Marcus pulled her into his arms before she finished the sentence. The version where he went quiet for a moment and then smiled the way he used to smile in the early years, slow and real and reaching all the way to his eyes. The version where they sat together at the kitchen island with their coffee and talked about names and timelines and what the guest room might become. She had not rehearsed the version that actually happened. But before any of that, before everything fell apart in the span of a single morning, there was Sophie. Sophie Hartley, Claire's best friend since their freshman year at Northwestern, was on FaceTime from her apartment 3 blocks away, propped against her own kitchen counter in the oversized sweatshirt she had owned since 2011 and absolutely refused to throw away. She was eating cereal directly from the box, which she did when she was either nervous or happy, and this morning it was both. Say it again, Sophie instructed, but this time without the thing. What thing? The jazz hands thing. You do jazz hands when you're nervous. It completely undercuts the gravitas of what you're trying to communicate. I do not do jazz hands. Claire, honey, I have documented evidence. Claire looked down at her hands, which were, she admitted privately, doing something in the general vicinity of jazz hands. She flattened them against her thighs and took a breath. I'm pregnant, she said, steady, clear, normal hands. Sophie pointed at her through the phone screen. Perfect. That was perfect. Do it exactly like that. You're not very calming for someone who's supposed to be calming me. I'm enormously calming. You're just too nervous to notice. Sophie set down the cereal box. Her voice shifted slightly, dropping the comedy. Hey, how are you actually doing? Claire looked at the test on the sink. 6 weeks. She had known for 4 days and had carried the knowledge alone the way you carry something fragile in both hands. Carefully, not quite able to look away from it. I'm okay, she said. I think I'm okay. I just need him to know. Once he knows, I can breathe. He's going to be happy, Sophie said. She said it with the particular firmness of a person who was choosing to believe something because the alternative was not worth entertaining at 8 in the morning. I know, Claire said. She almost believed it. Marcus Weston came through the front door of their Upper East Side penthouse at 9:47 in the morning, a full day earlier than his scheduled return from Chicago. Claire heard his key in the lock and felt something shift in the air of the apartment. The way pressure changes before weather arrives. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she was reading into ordinary sounds because she was nervous about an ordinary conversation. She was wrong on both counts. He looked different, not in any way she could have described precisely to another person, not thinner, or more tired, or visibly changed, just different in the way that a familiar room looks different when the furniture has been moved slightly, when everything is where it should be, but the proportions are subtly wrong. He smelled different, not his cologne, which she would have recognized anywhere after 4 years of marriage. Something underneath it. The faint ghost of another apartment's air, another life's particular warmth. She noticed. She filed it. She told herself she was inventing things. You're back early, she said from the kitchen doorway. Meeting got moved up. He set his bag down near the entrance and crossed to the coffee machine without quite looking at her. How are you? Good. I was hoping to talk to you actually. I tried calling yesterday. Long day, meetings back to back. He poured coffee into a mug. What did you want to talk about? Claire pressed her hand flat against her abdomen, a gesture she had been making without fully realizing it for 4 days. She looked at the back of his shoulders, the precise set of them, the way he held himself like a man braced for something. There was no right moment. There was only now. Marcus, she said, I'm pregnant. The kitchen went absolutely silent. She watched his face. She had imagined this moment so many times, in so many versions, that she knew immediately when the version she got was none of the ones she had prepared for. There was no breaking open of his expression, no crack in the careful architecture of his composure. What she saw instead moved behind his eyes, like a calculation loading, rapid and mechanical. A trader's mind receiving new data and sorting immediately for implications. Something in her chest dropped away quietly, the way a stone drops into very deep water. How far along? He asked. Not are you sure? Not that is incredible. Not even the performed happiness of a man who knows the correct response even when the feeling is not there. Just the clinical intake of information. 6 weeks, she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. He nodded once, set his coffee mug down, walked out of the kitchen without a word. She heard him in the study, the sound of a drawer opening, papers moving. She stood at the kitchen counter and pressed her palm against her abdomen and waited. She told herself there was an explanation. She told herself he was processing. She told herself the man she had married 4 years ago was still in there somewhere, under the distance and the distraction and the 18 months of merger stress, and that this moment would reach him. Marcus came back holding a manila envelope. He set it on the kitchen island between them. His face had reorganized itself into an expression she recognized from his professional life. Controlled, decisive. The face of a man who had already made the decision and was now simply executing it. What is this? She said. I had my attorneys prepare it last week. His voice was level, professional. It is a separation agreement. The terms are fair, more than fair. There is an apartment in Tribeca, a settlement, monthly support, while you establish yourself. There is also a non-disclosure provision, standard. In exchange for the settlement, you agree not to speak publicly about the marriage or about any aspects of our private life. Claire looked at the envelope. She looked at her husband. I told you 30 minutes ago that I am carrying your child, she said quietly, and you are standing in front of me with a separation agreement. He said her name in the warning tone she had heard before, gentle but unmistakable. The tone of a man who expected compliance. She held up one hand. Do not use that voice with me. I am trying to handle this with dignity. You had papers drawn up before you told me. You came home early because you wanted this done before something. What is the something, Marcus? What is happening on Friday? His silence was confirmation enough. I am not signing anything, Claire said. I am not having this conversation on your timeline because it is convenient for your schedule. Something shifted in his expression. The professional mask slipped just slightly, and what was underneath it was not guilt, not genuine regret, not love. What was underneath it was impatience. He made a phone call, 2 words into it. Be ready. 14 minutes later, the front door opened again. The woman who walked in was 40 years old with ice blonde hair and the kind of beauty that seemed engineered specifically to make other women feel slightly less substantial. She wore a gray coat and low heels, and she moved through Claire's living room like she was already making calculations about the furniture. Behind her came 2 men in dark suits who positioned themselves near the entrance with the studied blankness of professionals paid to not have opinions about what they were asked to do. Diana Cole. Claire had known the name, the way you know about weather before it arrives, from pressure changes and signs and the quality of the air around a person you have studied for years. She had seen the name in Marcus's emails. She had heard it spoken with a particular precision in calls he took in other rooms. She had noted the way a photograph, Marcus and Diana, at a conference in San Francisco, shoulder to shoulder in front of a glass wall overlooking the bay, had lived on his laptop for 3 weeks before being replaced by something neutral. Diana said nothing directly cruel. She didn't need to. She simply stood in Claire's living room and looked at the artwork on the walls with the quiet assessment of someone who was redecorating in her head. And then Claire saw the necklace. Platinum chain, teardrop diamond, large enough to catch the morning light and throw it in fragments. She recognized it. She had pointed it out 6 months ago in a jewelry store window on Fifth Avenue, pulling on Marcus's arm, saying, "Look at that. It is extraordinary." He had looked and nodded and said nothing in particular. He had bought it, just not for her. The 2 men moved toward Claire with the professional courtesy of people doing a job. One of them picked up her coat from the hook near the entrance. The other stepped close enough to make the message unmistakable. "You cannot do this," Claire said. Her voice was still steady. "I am your wife. I am pregnant. You cannot remove me from this apartment." "The apartment is in the company name," Marcus said from across the room. "It always has been. I will have your personal items sent wherever you direct." Claire looked at him one last time. She thought about what she had told herself 4 days ago when she first looked at that test, that this was the turning point, that a baby would finally shift the center of gravity between them, that it would make Marcus Cross look at her and see a partner. She picked up her phone from the coffee table. She did not take the coat. She walked past Marcus without looking at him. She walked past Diana Cole, who watched her go with those cool, assessing eyes and said nothing. She walked out the front door and into the hallway and pressed the elevator button with a hand that had finally begun to shake. Outside, February, And New York hit her like something physical, cold and real, and entirely indifferent. She stood on the sidewalk in her pajamas and a cardigan, no coat, no bag beyond her phone, 43 floors below the life she had been living 1 hour ago. She called Sophie. Sophie answered on the second ring, still in the oversized sweatshirt, cereal box in hand. "Why are you outside in your pajamas?" Sophie said. "I got evicted from my own marriage," Claire said. A pause, the sound of the cereal box being set down. "I'm putting on shoes," Sophie said. Sophie booked the hotel over the phone before she finished putting on her shoes. The front desk clerk at the Meridian Suites on Lexington Avenue, a young man named Todd, who had the particular New York gift of treating every situation as entirely normal regardless of evidence, processed the booking without blinking. "Will you be needing anything from the gift shop, ma'am?" he asked when Claire appeared at the front desk in her pajamas and cardigan, hands shaking slightly from the cold. "Socks," Claire said. "Please." "Of course. I will have those sent up with the key. And possibly a new identity." Todd looked at her with genuine professional sympathy. "We have socks," he said. Room 412 was beige and clean and warm, and Claire sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without removing her house slippers. The heat from the baseboard register filled the room with dry, steady warmth. And she let it work on her. Let the feeling come back into her feet. Let the shaking in her hands slow and stop. Let the sounds of the city outside the double-paned window recede into something manageable. Sophie arrived 20 minutes later with a bag from the drugstore on the corner. She set it on the bed without ceremony. Inside were socks, crackers, ginger tea, hand lotion, and a chocolate bar. "The chocolate is medicinal," Sophie said, sitting on the edge of the bed beside her. "Don't argue with me about it." Claire looked at the bag. Something cracked open slightly in her chest. Not grief yet. Not the full weight of what had happened. Something smaller and more immediate. The specific gratitude of a person who has been remembered by another person at exactly the right moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't. Tell me everything." So Claire told her. The 14 months, which she had suspected but never confirmed and was now confirming out loud for the first time. The manila envelope, the two men in dark suits, Diana Cole standing in her living room, making interior design calculations. The necklace. She told her about the baby too. Sophie made a sound that was not quite a word, something between an exhale and a grief. 6 weeks, Claire said. "I found out 4 days ago. And he just..." Sophie stopped, started again. "He knew about the baby and he still..." "Yes." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the careful precision of a woman choosing her next words, very deliberately, "He is a specific kind of terrible that deserves a specific kind of consequence." "I need a lawyer," Claire said. "Yes, first thing tomorrow." "I need to understand what my rights are." "The apartment is in the company name," he told me. He said it always has been. He said that out loud? To your face? He said it like he was reciting a fact. Sophie absorbed this. "We are going to need a very good lawyer," she said. "Do you know anyone?" "I know of someone. A woman named Patricia Holt from a dinner party 2 years ago. She is supposed to be extraordinary. The kind of attorney who makes opposing counsel actually nervous." She paused. "I also know that right now, tonight, you need to eat something and sleep. The lawyer is tomorrow. Tonight is just surviving." Claire looked at the ginger tea. She looked at the crackers. "The baby is okay," she said. It was the thing she had been holding most carefully since that morning, the thing she had not yet said out loud to anyone. "I saw the doctor last week. Everything is healthy." "Good," Sophie said. That is the most important thing. They sat together in the warm, beige hotel room, eating crackers and drinking tea, and Sophie talked about nothing, in particular, with the deliberate skill of a person who understood that sometimes what a friend needs is not comfort or strategy, but simply the sound of a familiar voice making ordinary conversation. She talked about the terrible movie she had watched the previous night. She talked about the restaurant on Madison that had finally gotten its act together. She talked about everything except the thing they were both thinking about, because the thing they were both thinking about would still be there in the morning. And tonight, it could wait. At 11:15, Claire's phone buzzed. An unknown number. New York area code. She almost did not answer. She was exhausted and hollowed out, and the idea of one more unknown variable felt like more than she could hold. She answered. Ms. Hartley, a man's voice, older, with a formal precision that did not belong to any professional register she could immediately place. Not a lawyer's voice exactly, something more deliberate. My name is Richard Caldwell. I am a senior partner with the firm of Caldwell, Grant and Associates. I represent the estate of Edward Hartley Sr. Claire went very still. I believe we have something significant to discuss, the voice continued. I am sorry, Claire said carefully. Who did you say? Edward Hartley Sr., your grandfather, Ms. Hartley. He passed away 8 months ago, as I believe you know. He spent the last several years of his life working with our firm to ensure his succession was handled with complete legal precision. There is a reason we have waited until now to make contact. A pause, measured and careful. What I have to tell you would be better said in person, but I want you to know tonight that you are not alone in this situation. Not financially, not legally, not in any way that matters. Claire stared at the wall of the hotel room. Sophie was watching her face with the focused attention of a person trying to read a foreign language in real time. Mr. Caldwell, Claire said, what are you telling me? I am telling you, he said, and his voice carried the particular weight of a man about to deliver information he has been preparing to deliver for a very long time, that you are his heir, his sole heir, and that what that means is something I would very much like to explain to you tomorrow morning, if you are able. The room was very quiet. Sophie mouthed what at her from across the bed. Claire held up one finger. Give me a moment. Tomorrow morning, she said to Richard Caldwell. Yes, I am able. She ended the call. She set the phone down on the bedside table. She looked at Sophie. My grandfather died 8 months ago, she said slowly. I know. You went to the funeral. The quiet man who sent birthday cards with $20 bills. He was apparently not just a quiet man who sent birthday cards with $20 bills. Sophie stared at her. What was he? Claire looked at the phone. She thought about the attorney's voice, the weight in it, the particular gravity of a man delivering news he had been holding in careful custody for a long time. I do not know yet, she said, but I think I am about to find out that this day was not the end of something. She pressed her hand against her abdomen. I think it might have been the beginning. Sophie looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said. I need you to explain that. And then I need you to sleep. And then tomorrow you are going to that meeting, and I am coming with you and waiting in the lobby, because I am not missing whatever this is. You cannot come to a meeting with my grandfather's estate attorney. I will sit in the lobby, and you will text me updates in real time. Sophie, Claire, I am sitting in the lobby. This is not a negotiation. Despite everything, despite the February cold that had been in her bones 2 hours ago, and the envelope on a kitchen counter, and the teardrop diamond and the two men in dark suits, Claire Hartley almost smiled. "Fine," she said. "You can sit in the lobby." That night, she pressed her hand flat against her abdomen and spoke quietly to the 6-week-old life inside her. "I do not know what any of this means yet," she said, "but I think your great-grandfather just changed something. I think he was waiting to change it. I think he knew." She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. But when sleep finally came, it was deeper than she expected. Downstairs in the lobby, a young man named Todd finished his shift and handed off to the night clerk and told him, entirely without embellishment, that room 412 had been a very interesting check-in. The night clerk, who had been doing this for 9 years, simply nodded. In this city, in this hotel, interesting was always the beginning of something. The offices of Caldwell, Grant and Associates occupied 4 floors of a building on Fifth Avenue that communicated, in the quiet language of genuinely old money, that whoever worked here had been working in buildings like this for a very long time and had never once needed to prove anything to anyone. The lobby alone was the kind of space that made you feel, not smaller exactly, but more careful. High ceilings, with original plasterwork, dark wood paneling that had been dark for decades, without being heavy. The particular quality of silence that expensive carpet and serious architecture create together. Sophie looked around the lobby with the expression of a person recalibrating rapidly. "I will be right here," she said, pointing to a leather chair near the entrance. "Text me everything." "I will text you what is appropriate to text." "Text me everything," Sophie repeated. Richard Caldwell was exactly what his voice had suggested. Tall, silver-haired, late 60s, with a face that had once been handsome and was now simply distinguished. He met Claire in the lobby himself, which she registered as unusual. He walked her to a conference room on the 31st floor with a view of Central Park that in the February morning light was genuinely extraordinary. He poured water from a crystal pitcher. He did not offer small talk. "Ms. Hartley," he said once they were seated, "well, what I am about to tell you is going to require some context. I would ask that you allow me to lay it out completely before asking questions." "All right," Claire said. He opened a folder on the table between them. "Your grandfather, Edward Hartley Sr., was born in 1939 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the son of a steelworker. He built his first business at 24 with $1,100 and a handshake agreement with a supplier in Ohio. By 35, he had 3 companies. By 50, he had founded what became Hartley Industrial Holdings, a diversified industrial and real estate holding company operating across 17 states and portions of Canada." He turned the folder toward her. "Your grandfather spent the last 5 years of his life locating you, verifying your identity, and working with our firm to ensure the succession was legally unassailable. He had 1 daughter, your mother, Margaret. She died when you were 9. After her death, you went to live with your maternal aunt in Ohio, and your grandfather, for reasons I will explain in a moment, was not in contact." He paused. "He never stopped knowing where you were. He simply waited until the timing was right, until the legal structure was right. He was a careful man." He turned another page. Claire looked at the documents spread across the conference table. She looked at the numbers. She read them once, and then again, and then a third time. $87 billion. She looked up. "The estate has been held in trust pending the completion of the succession process," Caldwell said. "The genetic verification was completed 6 months ago using a sample obtained through your physician with proper legal authorization. The results confirmed your biological relationship to Edward Hartley Sr. with a probability of 99.96%. He looked at her steadily. "You are his heir, Ms. Hartley, his sole heir. The inheritance is yours. The question is only when and how you choose to claim it. Claire sat with this for a long moment. She thought about the apartment 3 blocks from here, where she had grown up in Ohio with her aunt, the 2-bedroom house on Elm Street with the yellow curtains and the cracked driveway. She thought about her mother, Margaret, who had worked as a bookkeeper for 22 years and bought her school clothes at the end of summer sales and had never, not once, mentioned a father who was anything other than a distant and complicated absence. He and my mother were estranged, Claire said. For the last 12 years of her life, yes, there was a disagreement, significant and painful, about choices she made and choices he made. He believed he was protecting her. She experienced it as control. By the time either of them was ready to reach across the distance, her illness had progressed further than either of them had understood. Caldwell was quiet for a moment, for he spent the rest of his life trying to correct what he considered the central mistake of his. Not the business, not the money, the distance from his daughter, and from you. Claire pressed her hand against her abdomen without quite realizing she was doing it. Then Caldwell slid a photograph across the table. Claire looked at it. The photograph showed 2 men in a conference room. One of them was older, gray-suited, unfamiliar. The other was Marcus Weston. This photograph was taken 14 months ago, Caldwell said carefully, at a meeting between Marcus Weston's legal representatives and the estate attorneys for a separate Hartley family trust, a smaller holding that had been publicly searchable. It appears that Mr. Weston, through his own due diligence, became aware through back channels that his wife was a potential beneficiary of a significant estate. The details of the primary inheritance were sealed, but the existence of the Hartley family connection was, with sufficient investigation, discoverable. The room was very quiet. He knew, Claire said. The words came out flat, not a question. We believe he had reason to suspect that you might represent a significant financial liability to him in the event of a divorce proceeding. If the inheritance transferred to you during the marriage, the legal framework around marital assets becomes considerably more complex. Caldwell met her in eyes. The timing of the separation papers, served the morning after his early return from what was described as a business trip, suggests a degree of deliberate sequencing. Claire sat very still. She thought about the 16 months of coldness, the canceled dinners, the phone always face down on the counter, the affair with Diana Cole that she had known about in the way you know about something you are not yet ready to face. She had told herself he had fallen out of love with her. He had not fallen out of love with her. He had been managing his exposure the entire last year, she said quietly. He was not pulling away because he stopped loving me. He was positioning himself, making sure the marriage ended before the inheritance became relevant. Caldwell said nothing. He did not need to. The photograph on the table said everything. Ms. Hartley, he said after a moment, I want to be very clear about something. The inheritance is legally yours, regardless of your marital status at the time of claim. The divorce proceedings do not affect your right to inherit. What they may affect, depending on the terms of any agreement you sign, is the subsequent management and legal exposure of those assets. Which is why I would strongly encourage you to retain legal counsel immediately and to sign nothing whatsoever before doing so. I have an appointment with an attorney this afternoon, Claire said. Good. He closed the folder. There is one more thing. Something I have been waiting to tell you until I was confident you were in a position to hear it clearly. He reached into a second folder and removed a letter, handwritten, on heavy cream paper, in the careful script of an elderly man who had learned to write when handwriting still mattered. Your grandfather wrote this for you 3 years ago, Caldwell said. He asked that it be delivered when the time was right. I believe this morning qualifies. He slid it across the table. Claire looked at the envelope, her name on the front in that careful, deliberate hand. Claire Margaret Hartley. Her full name. Her mother's name in the middle. She did not open it in the conference room. She held it against her chest in the elevator going down, past the lobby, past the serious bookshelves and the expensive carpet. Sophie was in the leather chair by the entrance. She stood up the moment Claire came through the door, read her face in 2 seconds, and said nothing at all. She simply stepped forward and put her arms around her and held on. He was not just a quiet man who sent birthday cards, Claire said into Sophie's shoulder. I gathered that from your texts, Sophie said. He left me everything. $87 billion. Sophie went very still. Then carefully she said, I need you to say that number again. 87 billion? Another pause. Okay, Sophie said. So Marcus Weston divorced an $87 billion woman because he was afraid she might be a significant financial liability. Yes. That is the most expensive miscalculation in recorded human history. Despite everything, despite the photograph of Marcus in a conference room and the 14 months of managed distance and the teardrop diamond on another woman's neck, Claire laughed. It was short and surprised and not entirely steady, but it was real. I need to call my lawyer, she said. Yes, Sophie agreed. And I need to sit down because my legs are doing something unusual. She lowered herself back into the leather chair. 87 billion, she said, mostly to herself. He was afraid of $87 billion, and he handed her a check for 200,000. That man cannot do math. Attorney Patricia Holt turned out to be a compact woman in her mid-40s with red hair, reading glasses on a chain, and the particular energy of a person who had spent 20 years being underestimated and had decided to find it useful. She met Claire in her Park Avenue South office on a Wednesday afternoon, shook her hand with a firm, dry grip, and said, Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out. So Claire told her. From the morning, Marcus came home early to the conference room with Richard Caldwell, including the photograph of Marcus at the estate attorney meeting 14 months ago. Patricia Holt listened without interrupting. She made notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting that looked like it moved faster than most people thought. When Claire finished, she set down her pen. You signed nothing, she said. Nothing. Good. That is the first and most important thing. She tapped her pen against the legal pad. The prenuptial agreement you signed at the time of the marriage. Walk me through that document. It was standard, I thought. I had my own attorney review it before I signed. There were no provisions that seemed unusual at the time. And you reviewed it personally? Yes. It was 12 pages. I read every page. Patricia nodded. We are going to want a certified copy of that document from the marriage records. She made a note. The separation agreement he presented, the one you did not sign, what were the specific terms? $200,000 as a lump settlement, an apartment in Tribeca for 12 months, monthly support during what he described as establishing myself independently, a non-disclosure provision covering all aspects of the marriage, including, specifically, his relationship with Diana Cole. He named her in the non-disclosure. By name. Patricia looked up. That is interesting. Men who are confident in their position do not name specific people in non-disclosure agreements. They write broad language. He named her specifically, which suggests he was more concerned about Diana Cole's exposure than his own general privacy. She paused. Tell me about her. She is a corporate attorney. They have been together for approximately 14 months based on what I now know. She was involved in the legal structure of his company's most recent major acquisition, a technology firm in Seattle. They worked together professionally for 2 years before, from what I understand. Patricia made another note. All right, here is where we are as of today. You have a strong position on spousal support given the length of the marriage, the circumstances of the separation, and your current pregnancy. The inheritance complicates the asset picture in your favor because the inheritance was not generated during the marriage and is not subject to marital division. However, she set down her pen. The opposition is going to look for leverage, and leverage, in cases like this, usually comes in one of two forms: documents or witnesses. She looked at Claire steadily. I want you to be prepared for the possibility that Marcus Weston's legal team is going to produce something that reframes the narrative. I do not know what it will be yet, but in my experience, men who have been planning an exit for 14 months do not plan incomplete exits. 3 days later, at 8:47 in the morning, Claire found out what it was. She was in the hotel room eating crackers and reviewing the documents Richard Caldwell had sent over when her phone rang. Patricia Holt. Her voice was careful in a way that instantly tightened something in Claire's chest. I need you to come in this afternoon, Patricia said. Marcus's legal team filed a counter-motion this morning. What kind of counter-motion? A pause. They have produced a prenuptial financial waiver, signed, notarized, dated 3 years ago. It eliminates your claim to any marital assets and includes language that could complicate the inheritance claim. I did not sign a prenuptial financial waiver, Claire said. The prenuptial agreement I signed had no such provision. I know, Patricia said. The signature is yours. Claire sat with this for a moment. The signature is mine, she repeated. Forensically, yes. The handwriting matches your signature across multiple documents. The notarization appears legitimate. The date is consistent. Another pause. I want you in my office this afternoon so we can go through this together. I also want to tell you that a forged signature and a legitimate signature can look identical to initial review and very different under the right kind of examination. This is not over, but I need you to understand what we are walking into. The afternoon in Patricia's office was the most precise kind of awful. Claire sat across from her attorney and looked at a photocopy of a document she had never seen in her life, bearing a signature that was hers in every measurable way except the fact of having written it. Someone traced this from another document, Patricia said. She pointed to two specific letters, the C and the H, where the pressure of the pen was slightly inconsistent with the surrounding strokes. A forger who is working from a sample traces rather than writes. The muscle memory is not the same. It is subtle, but it is there. I am going to bring in a forensic document examiner. This is going to take time, but I believe we can challenge it. Who would have done this? Claire said. Someone who had access to documents bearing your signature. Someone who had both motive and opportunity. Patricia looked at her carefully. Who in Marcus's life had access to your signature over an extended period? Not just Marcus himself. Think about who else touched the paperwork of your marriage. Claire thought about it, and then she thought about the Christmas dinners in Greenwich, the holiday cards she had signed every year with both their names, the thank you notes she had written to Marcus's family after events. All of that correspondence handled, organized, followed up on by one specific person in Marcus's life. His mother, Claire said slowly. Carol Weston. Patricia said nothing immediately. She looked at Claire with the careful attention of a woman who had been in this work for 20 years and had learned to distinguish between intuition and evidence. Tell me about Carol Weston, she said. Claire told her. The Greenwich house, the holidays, the particular way Carol had always looked at her, not unkindly, but with a measuring quality, as though she were an investment being monitored for performance. The way Carol had inserted herself, gently and consistently, into the administrative details of their life together. The way she had always been more invested in Marcus's professional standing than in his happiness. "She signed my name," Claire said. The certainty of it settled into her chest like something cold and clarifying. "She has been doing this for 3 years. She planned this before Marcus even fully decided he wanted out. It was her insurance policy." "That is a very serious allegation," Patricia said. "I know. If it is true, it is also a criminal offense." "I know that too." Patricia picked up her pen. "Then let us start building the case," she said. The phone call from Carol Weston came 2 days later, while Claire was at her follow-up appointment at the obstetrician's office. Carol arrived at the hotel with flowers and a particular smile. Claire came back to the room to find Sophie in the hallway, outside the door, with the expression of someone who had made a calculated decision about access. "She is in there," Sophie said quietly. "She brought lilies. I have concerns. I can handle Carol Weston." "I know you can. I just want you to know that I am standing 6 feet away from this door, and I have opinions about how this goes," Claire went in. Carol sat in the armchair near the window, the flowers already in the vase on the desk, as though she had rearranged the room to her preference. She was 63, well-maintained, wearing the particular kind of understated jewelry that announces serious money to people who know how to read it. "I want you to know," Carol said, before Claire had fully sat down, "that I had nothing to do with any of this. The way Marcus handled this was wrong. I told him so." Claire sat down. She looked at Carol Weston. She had known this woman for 4 years. She had made her pecan pie at Christmas. She had thanked her, genuinely, for the wedding gift, for the birthday cards, for the small ceremonial kindnesses that had felt like family and had apparently been something else entirely. "I appreciate you coming," Claire said. She did not say, "I believe you." She let Carol talk. For 20 minutes, Carol was warm and sympathetic and careful, suggesting that a quiet private settlement would be better for everyone, especially the baby, especially given how these things became so complicated and unpleasant when they went through the courts. She pressed Claire's hand when she left. She said she would always think of her as a daughter. That evening, an email arrived from an anonymous address. The subject line read, "You should hear this." The attachment was a voice recording, 23 seconds long. Carol Weston's voice, clean and recognizable, on a phone call. "She will not fight it. She never fights anything. That is why Marcus married her." 3 days later, through the investigator Patricia had retained, Brenda Walsh entered the picture. Brenda Walsh was 41 and had been Marcus Weston's executive assistant for 6 years. She was methodical and meticulous, and she had, apparently, been keeping records of things that were not strictly her professional responsibility to record. She contacted Claire's attorney directly. She came in for a meeting. She sat across the conference table and placed a leather portfolio on the surface and said, with the particular gravity of someone who had been making a decision for a long time, "The notary who certified the prenuptial financial waiver works exclusively for Carol Weston's personal attorney. I have the billing records. I have the dates. I have emails that connect the document." Preparation to a meeting at Carol Weston's home in Greenwich that took place 11 weeks into Marcus and Claire's marriage. Patricia looked at the documents. "Carol Weston forged that prenup," Brenda said. "Not Marcus. He knew about it. He benefited from it. But he did not prepare it. She did. As an insurance policy, in case things did not work out the way she planned." The room was very quiet. Claire thought about the pecan pie. She thought about Christmas in Greenwich. The beautiful house and the careful welcome and the 4 years of small, deliberate kindnesses that had felt like love and had been something else entirely. She forged it the same year we went to their house for Christmas, Claire said. Sophie, who had been sitting quietly in the corner of the conference room, said, "What kind of pie did you make her? Pecan?" "She does not deserve pecan," Sophie said. For the first time in 10 days, Claire felt something clarify in her chest. Not hope exactly, not yet, but the specific quality of a situation that has been opaque suddenly becoming legible. They had the document examiner, they had Brenda, they had the billing records and the emails, they had Carol Weston. For 11 days, everything moved in the right direction. The forensic document examiner confirmed Patricia's assessment of the forged prenup with a written opinion that used words like conclusive and traceable pressure inconsistencies. Brenda Walsh's records connected the document preparation to Carol Weston's Greenwich home with a specificity that left very little interpretive room. Patricia filed a formal challenge to the prenuptial financial waiver on the grounds of fraudulent preparation. Marcus's legal team went quiet. That particular silence, Patricia told Claire, was the sound of attorneys regrouping. On the 11th day, Sophie took Claire to dinner at the Italian restaurant on Madison that had finally gotten its act together. They sat in a corner booth and shared pasta, and Sophie ordered sparkling water on Claire's behalf and still drank half of Claire's dessert. And they talked about small things. The movie Sophie had seen the previous week that she could not stop thinking about. The new coffee place on the corner that was either very good or aggressively pretentious, and possibly both. "You seem better," Sophie said at some point. "I feel like I might actually be okay," Claire said. "For the first time since all of this started, I genuinely feel like I might be okay." Sophie nodded. She did not say anything jinxy. She was too experienced a friend for that. But she knocked on the wood of the table 3 times, very quietly, when Claire was not looking. It was not enough. Patricia called the next morning at 7:52. "I need you to come in," she said. The careful voice. Claire recognized it immediately now. "What happened?" "Marcus's team filed an emergency motion this morning. They are seeking an injunction to freeze all assets connected to the Hartley estate, pending what they are describing as a full investigation into the circumstances of Edward Hartley Sr.'s estate planning." Claire sat down on the edge of the bed. "They are arguing," Patricia continued, "that you exerted undue influence over an elderly man you had minimal contact with in order to position yourself as his sole beneficiary. They are further arguing that the estate planning process was conducted under conditions that raise questions about Edward Hartley Sr.'s cognitive capacity in his final years." "He was perfectly competent," Claire said. "He spent 5 years preparing that succession with one of the most respected estate firms in the country." "I know. We know that. But an emergency injunction does not require proof. It requires sufficient argumentation to convince a judge that a freeze is warranted while the matter is investigated. And Marcus's team is very good at arguing." A pause. "The injunction was granted this morning. Effective immediately, all assets connected to the Hartley estate are frozen, pending a full legal review." Claire was quiet. "That is not the worst of it," Patricia said. "The worst of it was Brenda Walsh. Brenda's apartment was empty. Her phone was disconnected. Her email address bounced. She had, in the space of 48 hours, simply ceased to be findable." The third piece arrived 20 minutes later, a legal filing from Marcus's team. With the primary forgery witness gone, they were filing a counter motion to have the prenuptial financial waiver reinstated as a valid document, pending new forensic review by an examiner of their choosing. In one morning, the inheritance frozen, the primary witness gone, the forged prenup back in play. Claire sat on the hotel bed for a long time. Sophie arrived in 22 minutes with cereal and a look on her face that said she had read all 3 text updates and was managing her own reaction very carefully on Claire's behalf. "Tell me," Sophie said. Claire told her. Sophie set the cereal box down. She sat across from Claire on the hotel bed. She looked at her friend's face with the particular intensity of someone taking inventory of structural damage. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Claire said. "I am processing. Give me a moment." Sophie was quiet for 10 seconds. Then she said, "He disappeared, Brenda Walsh. Someone did. It was Carol. It has to be Carol. She is the one who had the most to lose from Brenda's testimony." "That is possible. Patricia's investigator is looking into it. And the injunction. 60 to 90 days minimum for a full estate review, according to Richard Caldwell. The assets are frozen until the court is satisfied that the estate planning process was legitimate." Which it was. Which it absolutely was. But legitimate processes can take a very long time when someone is motivated to delay them. Sophie looked at her steadily. "What are you feeling right now?" "Not strategically. Actually feeling." Claire looked at her hands. She thought about the morning 3 weeks ago when she had stood in a hotel lobby in her pajamas and asked for socks. She thought about the conference room on Fifth Avenue and the number 87 billion and the letter from her grandfather that she had read 3 times now, alone, late at night, until she could hear his voice in it, even though she had only met him a handful of times. "I feel," she said carefully, "like I am watching something be taken from me again, and I am very tired of that feeling." Then her phone buzzed. A notification from a social media account that tracked society events. A photograph from a charity gala the previous evening. Marcus and Diana Cole, her hand on his arm, the teardrop diamond visible at her throat. The caption described them as Manhattan's most dynamic new power couple. Claire looked at the photograph for exactly 4 seconds. Then she set the phone face down on the bed. "I need you to be honest with me," she said to Sophie. "Always." "Am I strong enough for this? Not in the way people say it to make you feel better, actually strong enough. Because what I am looking at right now is a situation where the man I was married to has been planning this for over a year. His mother has committed fraud on his behalf. Someone has disappeared, the one witness who could prove it, and $87 billion is sitting behind a legal wall that could take months to dismantle. And I am 12 weeks pregnant and living in a hotel room." She looked at Sophie. "So honestly, am I strong enough for this?" Sophie did not answer immediately. She sat with the question the way Claire had asked her to, honestly, without the comfortable reflex of reassurance. Then she said, "You walked out of that penthouse in your pajamas in February with nothing but your phone, and you called me and you said I got evicted from my own marriage. You did not cry. You did not beg. You walked out. You have been fighting for 3 weeks with nothing in your hands, and you are still upright and still asking the right questions." She paused. "I think you are strong enough. I think you have been strong enough this whole time. I just think you keep waiting for someone to confirm it." Claire looked at her. "You do not need confirmation," Sophie said. "You need a plan." "I need a plan," Claire agreed. "Then let us make one." Outside the window, New York conducted its relentless business. The city did not pause for grief or fraud, or frozen inheritances, or the specific particular devastation of a person who has discovered that the entire architecture of their marriage was designed by someone else as a containment strategy. But inside the hotel room, 2 women sat on a bed and made a plan. And somewhere in an office on Fifth Avenue, Richard Caldwell was about to answer a question that would change the shape of the next 6 months. Claire called Richard Caldwell at 9 the following morning. Sophie was on the couch with coffee, present but quiet, giving Claire the room she needed. "Mr. Caldwell?" Claire said, when he answered. "I have a question." "Of course." The injunction targets the Hartley estate, the primary holdings, the succession filings, everything connected to the formal estate proceeding. She paused. "Is there anything in my grandfather's documentation that Marcus's team has not seen? Anything that exists outside the estate proceeding, Bisai?" A silence on the other end. 3 full seconds. "There is one thing," Richard Caldwell said. "I have been waiting for you to be ready to ask about it." He told her. 18 months before his death, Edward Hartley Sr. had worked with Caldwell's firm to establish a secondary trust, separate from the primary estate, funded with $2.3 billion in liquid assets, titled directly in Claire's name from the date of establishment, held in a private trust institution in Vermont. The secondary trust was not part of the estate proceeding. It had not been filed with the same documentation trail. It had been structured specifically, deliberately, by a very careful old man who had anticipated that his succession would be challenged, to exist outside the reach of exactly the kind of legal maneuver Marcus's team had just executed. "The injunction targets the estate," Caldwell said. "The Vermont Trust is not the estate. It is a direct titled asset. It cannot be frozen by the same motion." Claire was quiet for a moment. $2.3 billion, she said. "Yes, liquid, accessible. Your grandfather described it, in his notes, as the firewall. His word. He said, and I am reading directly from his instruction letter now, that if anyone ever tried to stand between Claire and what is hers, this is what ensures she can stand back." Something moved through Claire's chest. Not triumph, something quieter, the specific feeling of being known by someone you barely got to know. "Why did you wait?" she asked. "Why did you not tell me about this at our first meeting?" "Because when I met you, you had been awake for one night in a hotel room after being removed from your home by men in dark suits. You were 12 weeks pregnant, and you had just learned that your grandfather was one of the wealthiest men in the country. I had watched your face absorb that information." A pause. "Your grandfather's instruction letter said, 'Tell her about the firewall when she has stopped waiting to be saved and started building the strategy herself.' Those were his exact words." Another pause. "That question you just asked me was the question I was waiting for." Claire pressed her hand against her abdomen. She thought about a man she had known as the quiet grandfather who sent birthday cards with $20 bills, who had lost his daughter to distance and stubbornness and the slow, quiet tragedy of things left unsaid for too long, who had spent the last years of his life making sure that his granddaughter would never be left without ground to stand on. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "I need a financial advisor, the best you have worked with, someone who understands corporate structure, legal leverage, and patience." "I know exactly the right person," he said. "Her name is Helen Marsh. She is in New York. Schedule a meeting for tomorrow." "Of course." She ended the call. She looked at Sophie. $2.3 billion, she said. "Separate trust. Not frozen, accessible." Sophie set down her coffee cup, very slowly and carefully. "Your grandfather," she said after a moment, "was the most prepared man who has ever lived. He called it the firewall." "Of course he did." Sophie pressed both hands flat on the coffee table. "Okay, so we have $2.3 billion that Marcus does not know about." "That is correct." "And he just spent 3 weeks trying to freeze assets he did not realize were the wrong assets." "Also correct." Sophie looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "I need you to understand that I am enormously proud of you for asking the right question at the right time. Your grandfather knew you would. I also knew you would. I just want that on the record. Noted. What do we do with $2.3 billion? Claire looked at the notepad where she had been making notes for 2 weeks. The legal timeline, the asset structure, the names and positions of people who had helped Marcus build what he had built and who might, under the right circumstances, reconsider their loyalties. We finish this, she said, properly, on our terms, not his. Helen Marsh was 57, silver-haired, with the unhurried authority of someone who had spent 30 years advising people with generational wealth on how to protect, position, and when necessary deploy it. She met Claire in a conference room and spent the first 15 minutes asking questions and saying almost nothing else. You have no financial background, she said finally. Nonprofit communications. Before that, literature. And you want to understand the strategy fully, not just be advised. I need to be able to walk into any room and know exactly what is happening and why. I need to be able to make the decisions myself. Helen studied her. Most people in your position hire people like me to handle it, so they do not have to understand. I understand that is easier. I am not interested in easier. Claire looked at her steadily. I have specific objectives. They require patience, and they require the ability to operate without anyone knowing what I am building until it is already built. I have time, I have capital, I have a very clear picture of what I want the outcome to look like. She paused. What I need is someone who can help me build the architecture. Something shifted in Helen Marsh's expression. The professional equivalent of heightened attention. Tell me the objectives, she said. So Claire told her. The next 4 months were the quietest and most deliberate of Claire Hartley's life. From the outside, very little appeared to be happening. She was a pregnant woman in a hotel room in New York, navigating a divorce proceeding and an estate challenge through her attorneys. She attended her prenatal appointments. She ate meals. She had long phone calls with Sophie, who had taken to calling every morning at 8 and every evening at 9 with the regularity of a scheduled appointment. From the inside, she was building something. Helen Marsh turned out to be everything Richard Caldwell had promised. Precise, patient, possessed of a financial intelligence that expressed itself not in volume, but in accuracy. She said very little, but what she said landed with the weight of a much longer speech. She met with Claire 3 times a week and taught her, simultaneously, the theory and the practice of corporate positioning. You are learning quickly, Helen said one afternoon, 4 weeks in. I have good motivation, Claire said. There were several things being built at once. The first was information. Patricia Holt's investigator located Brenda Walsh in Portland, Oregon, exactly where Sophie had predicted at her sister's house. Brenda had been relocated there by Carol Weston, who had paid for the flight and wired 3 months of salary as a thank you for her discretion. She was not, it turned out, disloyal to Claire. She had been extracted, against her better judgment, by a woman she had been too intimidated to refuse. When the investigator reached Brenda, she agreed to a video deposition within 48 hours. She was, the investigator reported, visibly relieved to be asked. The video deposition was 37 minutes long and covered, in precise and documented detail, the preparation of the forged prenuptial waiver, the involvement of Carol Weston's personal attorney, and the specific communication chain that connected the document to its fraudulent notarization. Brenda had kept records. She was a meticulous woman by nature and had understood, even as she allowed herself to be relocated, that she might one day need them. Carol Weston's criminal exposure was now fully documented, witnessed, recorded, and in the hands of Patricia Holt. The second thing being built was financial. Through holding companies that Helen structured with surgical precision, Claire began acquiring secondary debt positions in three of Marcus Weston's key institutional creditors. The amounts were not large enough to trigger disclosure requirements. They were large enough to matter at the right moment. At the same time, two fintech startups, operating in direct competition with Marcus's company, received, through investment vehicles Helen designed, carefully timed capital infusions. Neither startup knew who their ultimate backer was. Marcus, watching two competitors suddenly surge with resources he could not account for, had no way to trace the source. "You are not doing this for revenge," Helen said one afternoon, looking at Claire over the table. "No," Claire agreed. "I am doing it for completion. There is a difference." "Tell me the difference." "Revenge is about the other person. Completion is about closing a chapter properly." He made certain decisions. Those decisions had a cost. The cost should be proportionate and real. That is not revenge. That is consequence. Helen looked at her for a moment. "Your grandfather would have liked you," she said. It was the most personal thing she had said in 4 months. The third thing being built was slower and could not be rushed. Brenda Walsh's deposition was submitted to the court. The forensic examiner's report was resubmitted with additional supporting documentation. Patricia filed a motion to have Carol Weston's personal attorney formally questioned regarding the notarization records. Marcus's legal team, which had been operating with the confidence of people holding what they believed were decisive cards, went through a very visible recalibration when the full scope of what Claire's team had assembled became apparent. They made a settlement offer in month 3. Patricia called Claire with the details. "It is better than the original," Patricia said. "Significantly better." "What is their timeline?" "They want an answer within 2 weeks." "Tell them I need 30 days to review," Claire said. A beat. "You are going to let them wait," Patricia said. "I am going to let them understand that this conversation moves at my pace, not theirs." "Understood. 30 days. Patricia, one more thing. The prenuptial challenge. When the court rules, I want the ruling to be public record. I want Carol Weston's involvement documented in the official record." "That is already likely, given the nature of the filing." "I want it certain." "Then we will make it certain." On a Wednesday evening, in her 7th month of pregnancy, Claire sat in the hotel room that had become, against all expectation, something close to a home. She had a reading chair by the window. She had a small shelf of books. She had a yellow lamp that Sophie had brought over one afternoon without explanation, saying only that the overhead lighting was terrible, and she was not going to spend another evening watching Claire read under fluorescent light. She opened the letter from her grandfather for the 4th time. His handwriting was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had grown up in a time when what you wrote on paper was meant to last. "Dear Claire Margaret," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be gone, and I suspect the world will have shown you something difficult. It has a habit of doing that to Hartley women. Your mother was the strongest person I ever knew, and I spent too many years failing to tell her so. I am telling you now because it is what I would have told her if I had been braver and less stubborn and less convinced that time was something I had plenty of. You are going to be all right, not because I have left you resources, though I have, and I hope they serve you well. You are going to be all right because I watched you grow up from a distance, which is the most painful way to watch someone grow up. And what I saw was a person who gets back up. Every time, not dramatically, not for an audience, just quietly, consistently, every single time. The firewall is for emergencies. The rest is just yours. Use it as you see fit. I am sorry I did not know you better. I intend to spend whatever time remains making sure you know the important parts. With love, always, grandfather. She folded the letter and held it against her chest. Outside the window, New York was doing what it always did, loud and alive, and entirely itself. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in April, Claire Hartley's daughter was born. She named her Eleanor. Eleanor Hartley, clean and complete, a name that did not carry anyone else's history. Not a grandmother's name or a literary reference or anything Marcus had ever casually mentioned. Just Eleanor. Sophie, who had been in the waiting room for 6 hours and had eaten an entire bag of pretzels, wept immediately upon being shown a photograph and then denied it for the rest of the day. I had something in my eye, Sophie said. You cried. I had something in my eye for approximately 12 minutes. Sophie. She is very small, and she has your grandfather's nose, and I had an emotional response to that, which is entirely normal, and I am not discussing it further. Claire lay in the hospital bed with Eleanor on her chest and called Richard Caldwell. She is here, she said. Eleanor Hartley. A pause on the line, something quiet in it. Congratulations, Ms. Hartley, he said. Your grandfather would have been very pleased. She did not call Marcus. Patricia's office notified his legal team, as required by the custody framework being established. His team acknowledged receipt and requested documentation. The documentation went into the legal file. The legal file continued to grow. Eleanor was 6 weeks old when two things happened in the same week. The first was that the court issued its ruling on the prenuptial waiver challenge. The document was declared fraudulent with prejudice. The forensic evidence was cited extensively. The ruling noted, in language that would become public record, that the preparation of the forged document had been traced to the offices of a specific attorney working on retainer for Carol Weston, and that the circumstances strongly indicated deliberate, fraudulent intent. Carol Weston's attorney, reading the ruling, immediately filed a motion to distance his client from the findings. It did not succeed. Patricia called Claire at 7 in the morning. The prenup is gone, she said. Permanently. It is out of the case. Good, Claire said. Eleanor was asleep on her chest. There is more. Carol Weston was contacted by the district attorney's office yesterday afternoon regarding the forgery findings. She has retained criminal defense counsel. How did Marcus react? His team has been very quiet since the ruling came down. That is the reaction of people who have just realized the ground is significantly different from what they thought. The second thing that happened was a text message from an unknown number that arrived on a Thursday morning. Ms. Hartley. This is Brenda Walsh. I wanted you to know that testifying was the right thing. I should have done it sooner. I hope you and the baby are well. Claire typed back, Thank you, Brenda. We are well. 2 days later, she sent Brenda a formal letter through Patricia's office acknowledging her cooperation and confirming that her employment records and references from her 6 years with Marcus's company would be handled through proper channels. She also enclosed a personal note, handwritten, that said simply, What you did required courage. It mattered. She did not expect a response. She received one anyway. A single line on plain notepaper. He called you a loose end once. On a phone call, I had to transcribe. I have thought about that phrase every day for 2 years. I am glad the story ended differently. Claire sat with that for a long time. Then she went to Eleanor's room and sat in the chair by the window and held her daughter and watched the afternoon light move across the ceiling of the apartment that had been, over 6 months, gradually transformed from a beige hotel room into something that was genuinely hers. The yellow lamp Sophie had brought, the reading chair by the window, the small shelf of books, the framed photograph of her mother, young, laughing, standing in front of a lake somewhere in Ohio. Your great-grandfather sent birthday cards with $20 bills, she told Eleanor. who was awake and considering the afternoon light with the focused attention of a person who has recently discovered that ceilings are interesting. He was a very careful man. He thought about everything very far in advance. He thought about you, even though he never got to meet you. She pressed her lips to the top of Eleanor's head. I think you would have liked each other. Eleanor made a small sound that was not quite a word. I know, Claire said. Me too. The Whitmore Foundation Gala was held every October at the Grand Ballroom of the Whitmore Hotel in Midtown. 600 people in formal attire, the largest philanthropic event on the New York social calendar. Marcus Weston's company was listed as a principal sponsor. Sophie found this out on a Tuesday in September. She sat across from Claire at the kitchen table of the Tribeca apartment Claire had purchased outright 6 weeks earlier, and she slid her laptop across the table and pointed at the event listing. He is going to be there, Sophie said. Diana Cole, too. The society page has them listed under the principal sponsor table. Claire looked at the listing. She thought about 4 months of quiet building, about debt positions and competitor investments, and a forensic accountant named Kevin, who had, in September, delivered a report on Marcus Weston's company finances that contained 260 pages of material. That was, as he put it in his summary, likely to be of significant interest to the appropriate regulatory bodies. She thought about James Donovan, a journalist at the Financial Chronicle who had been developing his own parallel investigation of Marcus's company for 11 months and who had been waiting with the patience of a man who understood that the right moment for a story matters as much as the story itself, for a specific signal. I am going, Claire said. Sophie looked at her. I know. I just wanted to make sure you knew what you were walking into. I am walking into a room full of people who watched what happened to me and moved on without a second thought. I am walking in as someone who did not disappear the way they expected. She looked at the event listing, and I am walking in with a plan. Tell me the plan. She told her. The plan had 4 components. The first, Kevin's forensic report, delivered to the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority through an attorney in Washington who specialized in whistleblower protections, filed the Monday following the gala. The second, James Donovan's article, 17 months in the making, fully sourced, covering the revenue projection discrepancies in Marcus's most significant acquisition and the communications that indicated they were known and deliberately concealed, filed Saturday night, embargo lifting Monday morning. The third, Helen Marsh's debt call, invoking the contractual rights embedded in the secondary debt positions Claire's vehicles had quietly accumulated over 4 months. Executed Tuesday morning. The fourth, Claire at the gala, Saturday evening, giving Marcus Weston exactly 30 seconds of warning before his world changed. Sophie read back through her notes on the plan. That is either brilliant or terrifying, she said. Yes, Claire agreed. And you are going to walk into that room in what, exactly? I have not decided. Sophie closed her laptop. I have decided, she said. Navy blue, architectural. Nothing that tries too hard. You are not performing. You are simply present. There is a difference. The dress Sophie found was midnight blue with a neckline that was elegant without announcing itself. Claire tried it on in the Tribeca apartment on a Friday afternoon with Eleanor in the bouncer chair in the corner of the bedroom, examining the proceedings with the serious attention of a 6-month-old who had opinions about everything. Well, Claire said. Sophie looked at her for a long moment. You look, she said carefully, like someone who built something in the dark for a year and is about to turn on the lights. Is that a compliment? It is a very specific compliment, yes. The night of the gala, they arrived at 8:15. Not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to make an entrance that announced itself as an entrance. The exact moment when a room full of perceptive people would notice a new arrival and process it in real time. Claire checked her coat. She took a glass of water from a passing tray. She stood at the edge of the ballroom for 30 seconds and oriented herself. She found Marcus near the far windows in a group of 6. Black tuxedo, slightly thinner than she remembered, the sharpness of his jaw more pronounced. He was performing the particular kind of social energy that was also professional maintenance. Very good at it. Always had been. Diana Cole stood beside him in an ivory column, platinum chain, teardrop diamond, the same necklace. Ready? Sophie said from beside her. Entirely, Claire said. She moved into the room, unhurried, the ease of a woman who had nowhere to be and nothing to prove by getting there quickly. She exchanged brief words with 2 people she knew from her previous life in this city, both of whom looked at her with the slightly recalibrated attention of people who had recently searched her name and found something considerably larger than expected. She was 30 feet from Marcus when he saw her. She watched it happen, his eyes moving across the room in the automatic social scan. Stopping. The fraction of a second where the brain receives information that does not match any stored file. And then recognition. And then, underneath recognition, something she had not quite predicted. Fear. Not dramatic fear, the quiet fear of a man who has in one instant understood that something he believed resolved is not resolved at all, and that the resolution is going to happen on someone else's terms. He crossed the room toward her. She stood still and let him come, because she had all the time in the world, and he was the one who needed to close the distance. He stopped 3 feet from her. Claire, he said, controlled. She gave him credit for that. Marcus, entirely neutral, neither warm nor cold, simply present. His eyes moved over her quickly, processing the changed elements and the unchanged ones. I did not know you were back in New York. I arrived last month. You look. He stopped himself from finishing that sentence. You look well. I am well. She let a pause settle. You look thinner. It has been a demanding year, I imagine. It has. She took a single, unhurried sip of the water she had been carrying. The regulatory inquiry must be stressful, she said lightly. These things have a way of resolving themselves, one way or another. His eyes sharpened. That is a private matter under. Of course, she said, with a lightness that was completely controlled. I did not mean to be indiscreet. She glanced past him toward Diana Cole. Diana looks well, too. I have always admired her taste in jewelry. The silence that followed was brief and very loud. What are you doing here? He said. Quieter now. The professional smoothness dropping toward something raw. The Hartley Foundation has been a supporting contributor to the Whitmore's charitable initiatives for decades. I am here in that capacity. She met his eyes. As Ariana Valdivia, she caught herself. As Claire Hartley. I imagine you know what that means. He did know. She could see it. I think we should find somewhere private to speak, he said carefully. I do not think we need to, she said pleasantly. Everything that needs to happen between us has already been set in motion. You will understand that fully by Tuesday. She set her water glass on a passing tray. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. She turned and walked away. She did not look back. Sophie fell into step beside her near the entrance. Well, Sophie said. Done, Claire said. How did he look? She thought about his face, the control, and underneath it, the fear. The rapid visible recalculation of a man who had spent his entire professional life being the person who saw the moves before anyone else, who controlled the pace and the terms, now understanding for the first time that he was several moves behind and had been for over a year. He looked, Claire said, like a man who just realized the board was different from what he thought. Sophie handed her a glass of water. "Let us get some food," Sophie said. "I have been running on anxiety and one breadstick since 6 o'clock. There is a full dinner service. I am aware. I have been watching it from across the room for 2 hours like a person watching a cake cool." Claire laughed. The real laugh, full and warm. "Come on," she said. "Let us eat." Sunday passed with the specific quality of hours before a storm. James Donovan's article went to the editors at 9 in the evening, embargo lifting Monday morning. Kevin's forensic report had been filed Friday through the Washington attorney. Helen Marsh spent the day in the converted second bedroom of Claire's Tribeca apartment, running through every contingency scenario one final time. Claire spent the evening with Eleanor. They sat on the living room floor with the yellow lamp lit and read 4 books, including one about a small bear navigating a forest that Eleanor had developed a strong preference for, indicated by her reaching for it, specifically whenever Claire held up options. "You have opinions," Claire told her. "That is going to be very useful." Eleanor held up the bear book with both hands and made her case. "All right," Claire said. The bear book. Again. After Eleanor was asleep, Claire sat for a while in the doorway of her room and looked at her daughter's small chest, rising and falling in the easy rhythm of total, uncomplicated rest. She thought about the morning that had started all of this. The positive test on the sink, the rehearsed speeches, the jazz hands, Sophie on FaceTime in the oversized sweatshirt. She thought about the sidewalk, the cold, the 14 blocks in her pajamas. She thought about a letter on cream paper and careful handwriting. "You are going to be all right, not because I have left you resources, because you get back up. Every time." She walked to her own room. She set her phone face up on the bedside table. She wanted to see the notifications arrive in real time. She closed her eyes. She slept deeply, the way a person sleeps when they have finished something enormous, and the body finally believes it is allowed to rest. Monday began at 6:12 with her phone lighting up. Cross Capital shares opened down 14% amid reports of formal regulatory investigation into acquisition representations. James Donovan's article in the Financial Chronicle, 17 months of reporting, fully sourced, generating shares at a rate the algorithm was flagging as exceptional. Text from Helen Marsh. "All positions confirmed, ready to execute Tuesday on your signal." Text from Patricia Holt. "Court filing confirmed receipt of forensic report. Marcus's legal team is aware. Expect contact today." She set the phone down. She looked at the ceiling of her bedroom in the Tribeca apartment that was hers, fully and completely, titled in her name. Then she got up. She put on coffee. She went to wake Eleanor. By noon, Marcus's company had issued a statement. 2 paragraphs, carefully worded, acknowledging the regulatory inquiry in language designed to minimize alarm. It moved the share price from down 14 to down 9. By 2 in the afternoon, Patricia Holt called to say that Marcus's outside counsel had made contact requesting an urgent meeting. "Tell them Wednesday," Claire said. 2 o'clock. They asked for tomorrow. Wednesday, 2 o'clock. A beat. "They will agree to Wednesday," Patricia said. "Yes," Claire said. "They will." Tuesday morning, at 9:15, Helen Marsh executed the debt call. It was not dramatic in its mechanical form. A series of communications between financial institutions, precise and formal, invoking contractual rights that had been patiently built over 1 year and quietly positioned over 4 months. Its effect was immediate and architectural. Cross-Capital shares, which had partially recovered to down 9 the previous afternoon, opened Tuesday at down 21%. By 10 o'clock, they were down 26. Marcus's CFO resigned effective immediately, citing personal reasons. Diana Cole's legal practice issued a statement separating itself from any association with Marcus Weston or Weston Capital, characterizing the acquisition integration issues as originating from Marcus's side of the transaction. The statement was swift and clinical and answered every question about the nature of Diana Cole's loyalty. She was cutting him loose. Claire sat with this for a moment. She thought about Diana Cole standing in her living room 4 years ago, the cool, assessing eyes, the platinum necklace. She thought about what it meant that Diana was now doing to Marcus exactly what Marcus had done to Claire, identifying a liability and separating from it with clean, ruthless efficiency, because that was how these people operated. And Marcus had invited her into that world and ultimately used its logic against her. There was something in that, not justice exactly, but a structural completion, the wheel turning all the way around. Wednesday at 2 o'clock, Marcus's legal team arrived at the conference room Patricia had arranged. 3 attorneys, led by a senior partner named Grayson, who had the face of a man who had spent a career managing exits and understood that the management of exits was its own kind of craft. Claire sat across from them, with Patricia on her left and Helen Marsh, present as an observer, on her right. Grayson opened without preamble. My client is prepared to discuss a resolution. Given the regulatory environment and the current market position, it is in everyone's interest to arrive at an orderly outcome. Orderly, Claire said, the same tone she would have used to note the weather. The specific elements my client is prepared to discuss include the debt positions, the competitive investment structures, and the overall framework of an agreement that would. Mr. Grayson. She said it quietly, without heat, with the tone of a person who is simply in possession of the authority and does not need to announce it. I want to be precise about what this conversation is and what it is not. This conversation is not a negotiation about whether the regulatory consequences proceed. They proceed. The documentation is in the formal record. What this conversation is about is the structure of what comes after. Grayson's expression remained professionally composed. Specifically, Claire continued, the structure of Marcus Weston's departure from the company he built, the terms under which the viable assets are reorganized, and the establishment of a permanent trust for his daughter before any other distribution is made. A silence. My client is not prepared to discuss departure terms at this stage, Grayson said. Then I would suggest he become prepared, Claire said, because the alternative is that the debt call proceeds to its natural conclusion without an agreed framework, which means the creditor negotiations happen in the open, under the existing regulatory cloud, with full press coverage. The outcome for your client's personal financial position is considerably less organized than what I am prepared to offer in this room. She paused. I am not interested in destroying Marcus Weston. I am interested in specific defined outcomes. If he is willing to discuss those outcomes in good faith, this can be finished cleanly. Grayson looked at her for a long moment. What specific outcomes? She told him. The terms were 5 pages. The injunction on the Hartley estate dropped. The forged prenuptial document withdrawn with formal admission of improper preparation. A trust account for Eleanor funded before any other distribution. Non-negotiable. Marcus resigns as CEO effective immediately. Full cooperation with the regulatory investigation. A 5-year restriction from the sector. and one additional term stated verbally and not in the document. I want Carol Weston's involvement formally acknowledged in the legal record, Claire said. Not as a footnote, as a finding. The forgery, the relocation of Brenda Walsh, all of it, on the record, permanently. Grayson absorbed this. My client will need to review. He has until Friday, Claire said. 5 o'clock. The Cross Capital Emergency Board meeting was held Thursday morning. Claire arrived early and sat adjacent to the head of the table, in the position of a person who was present at someone else's meeting and entirely comfortable with that fact. Marcus entered last. Thinner than the gala, the sharp jaw and dark eyes still present, but operating under visible strain, the way a precise instrument looks when it has been pushed past its calibrated range. He looked at her when he walked in. She met his eyes. The board moved through 40 minutes of procedural presentation. Regulatory exposure, financial position, legal liability. Claire listened without speaking. When the procedural portion concluded, the board chair, a man named Elliot, who had been on the Cross Capital Board for 12 years and had called Claire 2 weeks prior to say, with careful diplomatic language, that he hoped the situation could be resolved in a way that protected the institution, looked around the table. We need to address the governance question, he said. I will speak to the governance question, Marcus said. Every person at the table looked at him. I built this company, he said. His voice was controlled. She gave him that, always. The current situation is manageable. It has been characterized in ways that... Marcus? Her voice was quiet. He stopped. She looked at him steadily across the glass table. The documentation is in the formal record. Preston, Brenda Walsh's testimony, the forensic accounting report, all of it. This is not a conversation about whether the situation is manageable. It is a conversation about what comes next. You do not have a seat on this board, he said. The rawness was closer to the surface. I hold instruments against 3 of this company's primary creditors. I have ownership positions in 2 of your principal market competitors. I have documentation that is part of a formal regulatory file, and I am prepared to provide further documentation as the investigation proceeds. She kept her voice level, factual. I do not need a seat on this board to be the most consequential person in this room, Marcus. I think you know that. The silence that followed lasted long enough for every person at the table to understand, with the clarity that comes when all ambiguity has been exhausted, exactly what was true. Elliot cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss the terms that have been proposed. They discussed the terms. Grayson was present. Patricia was present. Helen sat at the end of the table and said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. At 11:40, Marcus Cross looked at the 5-page document in front of him. All right, he said, quietly, without drama, the way a person says a thing that has been inevitable for a while. The word fell into the room, and that was the sound of it. Small and final. Claire did not feel triumph. She had expected to, had occasionally worried that when this moment arrived, it would feel like not enough, that no resolution could carry the weight of what had been lost and remade. But what she felt was quieter and more structural than triumph, the feeling of a thing completed, of a load-bearing wall rebuilt properly this time, in the right place, by the right hands. She stood. She looked around the table, at the board members, at Patricia, at Helen, at the floor-to-ceiling window, and the October skyline behind it. Then she looked at Marcus Cross one final time. The papers will be ready by end of business today, she said. Patricia has the details. She picked up her bag. Her hand was on the conference room door when his voice came from behind her. Claire. She stopped. She did not turn around. What I said, he said. 4 years ago, on the phone, when I called you. A pause. A loose end. That is the one I cannot undo. She stood at the door for a moment. The room was very still behind her. No, she said, it is not. She opened the door. She walked out. She took a cab back to Tribeca because she needed the movement of the city outside the window, the blocks passing, the gradual shift from Midtown to the neighborhood that had become, in 2 months, more genuinely home than 4 years in a penthouse had ever been. Eleanor was in the park with her babysitter. Claire paid the cab and walked to find them. She spotted Eleanor from half a block away, recognizable at any distance by the yellow jacket, by the specific quality of her movement, which was always forward, always committed, always slightly faster than was strictly necessary. She was on the small climbing structure, working her way up with the systematic persistence of a person who had decided that falling is simply part of the process and not a reason to stop. Sophie was on the bench, which Claire had not expected, but which, on reflection, made complete sense. Sophie was not going to be at home on the morning this particular chapter closed. She raised a hand when she saw Claire coming. Claire waved back. She slowed her pace. She let herself take the last half block slowly, let the morning land. Eleanor saw her from the top of the structure. Her face opened into the expression that had no counterpart anywhere else in the world. The pure, uncontained brightness of a child who has spotted the specific person she most wants to see. Mama! She began to climb down immediately, efficiently, without hesitation. I'm watching, Claire called. Eleanor reached the bottom and ran toward her, with the yellow jacket flapping and her arms already open, and Claire went down to her knees on the park path and held out her arms, and Eleanor ran into them, warm and solid and entirely present, smelling of morning air and October. She held her. She felt the familiar structural rightness of it, the thing that no other thing replicated, the thing she had built everything else around and would continue to build everything else around. Did you do the important work? Eleanor asked into her shoulder. I did, Claire said. Is it finished? Claire thought about the conference room, the glass table, the word all right falling into the still air, the door opening and the walk out and the cab ride back through the city that had watched her walk 14 blocks in her pajamas 4 years ago and had kept moving without breaking stride. Yes, she said, it is finished. Eleanor leaned back to look at her with the unsentimental assessment of a 6-month-old who had recently developed strong opinions about most things. Sophie, from the bench, said quietly, How are you? Claire looked at her friend. She thought about a FaceTime call 4 years ago in an oversized sweatshirt, about a hotel booking made over the phone before the shoes were fully on, about cereal boxes and chocolate bars described as medicinal, and a yellow lamp brought over without explanation because the overhead lighting was terrible. I am good, Claire said. And it was not the performance of good. It was simply true. He signed? He signed. Sophie nodded. She did not say I told you so, because she had never said I told you so in 22 years of friendship, and she was not going to start today. Are we celebrating? She asked. We are getting soup, Claire said. The real kind, not the cup kind. Obviously the real kind. I have been waiting for the real kind soup day for 4 years. Claire stood up. She took Eleanor's hand, small and warm, and absolutely certain of its grip. She took Sophie's arm with her other hand. The three of them walked out of the park together into the October morning, into the city that received them as it received everyone, without ceremony, without sentiment, with the magnificent indifference of a place that has seen everything and stopped being surprised. She did not look back at the park. She did not look uptown toward Midtown, toward the 41st floor, where the papers were being signed in a glass room above the city. She looked at the street ahead. She looked at the hand in hers. She looked at what was next. The morning light was extraordinary. The city was loud and alive and entirely itself. Claire Hartley walked forward into it, and she did not stop, and she did not look back. And the only thing she felt, clean and complete, and larger than any single word she had for it, was free. Closing disclaimer. The story you just experienced was carefully researched, written, and hand-edited by our team. Every narrative detail, emotional beat, and character arc was built manually with the intention of delivering something meaningful, not just entertaining. We believe stories have the power to remind people of their own strength at exactly the moment they need it most. Thank you for trusting us with your time. It is not something we take lightly.